Hey y'all, welcome to episode 3 of Long Live the ABB, conversation from the crossroads of Southern music history and culture. Episode 3 features David Goldflies. David played bass in the Allman Brothers from 1979 to 1982. He also was Dickey's bassist from 1977 through 1983 with Betts Hall Leavell Trucks. Here's part 1 of our conversation, joining Dickey Betts and the ABB's impromptu reunion in 1978.
You were, if I recall, was it a disco band or a top 40 band? And you got this call to join Dickey Betts on the road. You just told me it was 77. So he's got this great Southern band with Dan Toler in it. All right. You're a musician and you're a musician's musician. I see, like you've studied, you're doing your thing, but this is not on your radar.
Not at all. No, not at all. Well, I mean, you said a disco or a top 40 band. Back then, it was the same thing. You're just playing for. We were in a little nightclub, at the Buttermilk Crescent exit at, I forget the name of the actual. It was like a hotel with a little bar attached. And I just gotten in the band. I'd been in there 2 weeks, man. Before that, I was sad, depressed, lonely. My car broke down. I was living with my parents. The band I played with before the Allman Brothers broke up. So I was sad, and that's the band that cut Black Betty. We can talk about that later. But then David Toler, I played a little showcase for the agency that had us booked. I think it was the Horizon Agency out of Columbus. And this was all in Northern Kentucky, right outside of Cincinnati. And we played a showcase, and David Toler's band played on the showcase, and I played, and they gave me this little bass solo, like on Play That Funky Music, White Boy or something. And David came up and said, "Hey man, remember me from that barn out in Liberty, Indiana, where we got together and jammed once?" I met David Toler there, and we played a song by Chick Corea called "Spain."
Okay.
Which is a pretty popular tune of Chick Corea's, And I remember we had a bunch of rock and rollers around us. We played a bunch of rock stuff, but I told David I was really into jazz. He says, "Man, so am I." I said, "Well, I've been working on Spain." So we played Spain, and the rockers looked at us like we'd lost our minds. But David remembered who I was. Like, oh, that guy, he's sort of like a musical connection, right? So when Danny Toler came down from Chicago, where they had lost their bass player, Kenny Tibbetts was playing in Great Southern. Danny reached out to David and said, "Hey, man, you know any local bass players?" He said, "Well, yeah, I know this one guy, man. And I just saw him at this little agency, showcase." And so in comes Danny Toler, right? And he says, "Hey, I'm David's brother, and Dickey Betts is looking for a bass player." And my response was, "Great. Who's Dickey Betts?" And then he said, the Allman Brothers. I said, "I know the Allman Brothers." And then it all came back because, again, as I tell audiences, we used to skip school and get stoned and go home and listen to the Allman Brothers. So that all came back into focus pretty clearly. And so I went and tried out for the band the next day, the next morning, at a little place called the, oh, come on, Brandon, you can do this. It'll come back. It's on Reading Road, though, in Cincinnati, Ohio. I walked into a little room, and there's Dickey, and there's me, and he handed me a bass, and I played for, I'm going to say it's a minute. Might have been less. He says, "You're great, man. Get on the bus." I said, "I can't leave, man. I got a gig tonight. I can't just stiff the guys I've been playing with for 2 weeks." He said, "Be in Nashville in 2 days or you don't have the gig." I said, "I'll be there." So I went back, called the old bass player. He was like all pissed. "I got to come back. I'll give you all my money." Ah, man, he was pissed. I don't know what happened next because I left. I gave him all my money now. And I made no money for those 2 weeks playing in that band, but that's probably an okay thing. And as I walked out to the bus, as I walked out of Dickey's room, this is all true. Dickey had a black eye. And I said, "Dickey, what happened to your eye?" He just growled at me, man. And he walked out. Wow. What am I supposed to think? I just met this guy, right? So I walked out to the bus, and there's Danny Toler, and he says, "Guys, here's a new bass player, the rookie, the Rook." And that took right then. It's like within 2 minutes, man, like 2 minutes. And that took. And then they still call me the Rook. It's weird, but true.
I do, and you are many years my senior, and that's how we know you in Allman lore, because
I was
that's
there
how
when
you
Frankie got his name too. When David Toler got his name.
Okay, you got to I spill on that one because that makes zero sense to me.
It does make Frankie Toler, and it made no sense. We were playing at the Silver Dollar Bar in Bradenton Beach, not a gig. We lived on Bradenton Beach in the Bradenton area when we were playing in Great Southern. And we went down and jammed at the local bar, the Silver Dollar Bar. and the guys got real drunk. Alcohol was never my thing, but the guy was pretty. David was pretty happy, put it that way. Not as drunk. He played well, and he came off stage, and there was this pretty girl, and he said, "Well, hello, Betty," and she turned around and said, "Well, hello, Frankie," and everybody just started laughing their asses off because it was just like instantaneous, and everybody just started calling him Frankie.
That's
which is weird, man. But it's true. I mean,
that's awesome. You were there at the creation.
Not true. Someone with a better memory can show up and say that's a better memory. I don't care, but that's what I recall.
That's the first time I heard that. So you got on the road on that Great Southern, where you went and toured with them. Right. I mean, that they were road dog. Y'all were road dogs. You went over to Europe and recorded a couple things. So what is that ride like from this top 40s type band situation to, I mean, you're not, you got the 5-star stuff is kind of waiting on you when the Allman Brothers reunite, but it's still a whole different ballgame than playing.
Yeah, well, compared to what I was doing, it was 5 stars, but I didn't know what 5 stars was because I hadn't played the Allman Brothers yet, but it was nice. We went out to Los Angeles. First gig was at the Roxy, I think, or something on Sunset Avenue. And all the movie stars came out to see Dickey. It's like, wow, this is a trip. And that was a weird gig, man, because I found out later what happened. Scalise, the guy from Molly Hatchet, is that right? Am I thinking of the right bands there? 38 Special, Scalise, the guitar player.
I'll look it up. In fact, I'll look it up while you're telling the story. Yes. Yeah,
be accurate. We played the show, and three times during the night, Dickey would be tuning his guitar, and it wouldn't tune. It's like, and so he had to go off stage with his guitar tech and get his guitar worked on. I said, "Hey, Rook, take a bass solo." So like, this is my first gig, man. Literally walked on stage, didn't even know if I knew the tunes. I didn't even know if I didn't know the tunes. Take a solo. Okay. And it happened over and over and over. And like, it was just the weirdest night. Had a great time. It was a fun gig. Years later, I had a friend here in Destin, Florida that put me together with, is it Mark Scalise? I hope
I'm not finding it quickly, but I could be misspelling it too.
Yeah. Anyway, I think 38 Special. I should know this. But anyway, he said, "Yeah, that night you opened for us, man." And I lent Dickey a guitar. And it turned out that one of my strings was wound backwards on the post. So when he tuned it the way he wanted to, it went the opposite direction. I finally found out why that happened, like 40 years later.
Wow. And why you got like literally Dickey looks over at you and says, take over.
Take a bass solo. And he walks
you're
off
like,
stage.
I mean, listen, David, I play, I'm not a stage guy. I'm not a road dog. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the craft and what you do. That's a moment when you've been thrown in the deep end, when you earn your stripes on a gig for sure. And
I had
with
no
Dickey,
idea what was going on, man. It was like, this is a trippy gig. The second gig was fun. The second gig was fun because we played at the in Las Vegas. Real big hotel. Again, names are escaping me. Getting old. Yeah. But I loved it because all the girls who worked there were in these like skin tight gold jumpsuits. I said, this is pretty cool. And so Dickey comes up to me and goes, "Hey man, can I borrow $25?" Okay. I said, "Well, what for?" He said, "I got to get a marriage license." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." So I gave him that, and he married Paulette.
Duane Betts' mom. Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
These are
and that was gig
things
2.
That
That's so thus far you have 2 gigs. Bass solo called in the middle of nowhere, and second is you're giving money to Dickey for a marriage license to marry Paulette Betts.
And somewhere, I know I kept this little thing you wrote on there, $25, but I can't find it. It says who knows. But that's all true. Again, if someone has a better story, I'm open to it. But this is what I recall, And I wasn't really, really high right then. I was kind of like, what's going on,
So what is I want to talk about bass playing in just a little bit, but Dickey was the musical director of Great Southern. He was clearly the musical director of the Allman Brothers when you were there, and he was all the way through until 2000. What is that like to work with him in that era? Because he really was at the peak of his powers and game. Y'all weren't selling a lot of records or concert tickets, but that stuff holds up, that Great Southern.
They sold quite a few concert tickets, and I guess the albums did okay. They just weren't as good as the other albums. I mean, I wish right now I would have sales as bad as theirs, put it that way.
That's true.
You know,
True story. Truth.
so
Yes.
it's all compared. But when you have live at the Fillmore, you're competing with, and these kind of things. But I mean, we had one album that did go gold, so it's 500,000.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it's not 1 million or 2 million or 5 million. But Dickey's, you're talking really about Dickey's directing skills. I didn't have a lot to compare it to. I did have something to compare it to though. But Dickey, at the time just seemed a little intimidating because his style of conducting isn't like an orchestral conductor with the hands and all this diplomatic speak. It's more like a look like he's mad and like wants you to do something, and you're trying to discern what is it he wants me to do. But eventually I learned what that was. And then he didn't have to look around and look so mad so often. And a lot of times he would direct with his shoulder, like a solo like that. Like little things, just the little body language things that you would learn. But he was a strong director at that. He was also, as you know, a student of the songwriter. He had buddies like was that guy's Paycheck was this country singer, Johnny Paycheck, and Billy Joe Shaver would come out, and a bunch of these guys would be hanging out with him. So he'd be with these other writers, and they would just discuss writing music, and sometimes they write music together. Like. Crazy Love. I kept hearing he wrote that during that period. I heard versions of that coming out of him in that period. So he was a strong songwriter, and then he had a definite view of how he wanted things to go. And one example would be we used to have, and other guys have said this when we played the GABA Fest last year.
Yep.
With like a tribute to Dickey Betts, and we all got together. There was a couple of us talking, especially for me, the bass players, and we talked a little bit about how you'd have a sound check. And the band would start jamming, it'd be kind of cool. And then Dickey would walk on stage and the whole style would completely change and would just be Dickey's style. So he was a very definite person about his style, but within that, he was very broad. If you look over his work over all the years, after he passed away, I did some more research into Dickey. And it's just amazing how many different things he would put his toes into musically,
Yeah. Yeah.
Straight country stuff, jazz fusion stuff. I mean, I've played a lot of classical music since I played in the Allman Brothers, and frankly, his melodies and compositions and forms hold up to anything I've played by some of the greats. I mean, okay, you might not have been Mozart, but he's not that far off.
It's interesting you say that too, David, because it's always been you may not know, but it's always been Butch who gets the credit. Butch is the one most vocal about having a classical influence, and I've always heard classical influence in the Allman Brothers, multiple movements, dynamics in the music, these sorts of things. Right. And I've doing the research that I did for my book and just in general, I've really got a chance to dive deep into Dickey's motivations, like as a songwriter and as an artist. Cause there's the caricature, there's the guy with the black eye who got in a fight with his bass player, which is why you got in the band in the first place.
Right. Exactly.
And then there's this super sensitive, deep, introspective artist, and artists have a hard time expressing themselves. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. You are also an artist. Like it's not as easy, and it's his breadth, which I did the same. Been doing it on my blog since I launched it, and I did it after he died. I'm all the way to. I did all his instrumentals. The only ones I have left are Pegasus from the Madness of the West and Duane's tune from his record, Dickey Betts Band record. Oh, okay. So I've done all the ones I know, and I know Pegasus really well. I love that song. But
we've recently added that. I think maybe you don't know. We added it to our set last year ago. It's still in our set. So we're doing Pegasus when we do go out. My Band of Brothers Revival, we do Pegasus. It was kind of nice to bring it in, like refreshing,
You should be bringing that in. That's a great instrumental Dickey Betts song that fits beautifully in this era, moves along very well. So, okay, so you go out on tour, you recorded Atlanta's Burning Down, and as that's going on, the Allman Brothers start to reform. You're not,
but I don't know that.
Right. You're not privy to any of this.
No, I don't know that. Yeah. Exactly.
You show up to a gig at Central Park in August of 1968. When did you learn that there was a reunion of the Allman Brothers Band happening?
On stage. I mean, literally on stage. I found out recently that I had just played a show on Long Island for the WLIR radio broadcast. And the reason I know that is because they contacted me, Alan Paul contacted me about doing some like memories from that era to go on the liner notes for they're going to re-release it on vinyl. But that was like within about a week. That show was a week within when we played the Central Park show, which is where the transition, the meeting happened of the reformation of the band. I was playing in Central Park, and we walked on stage with Great Southern, which means we had Mike Workman on the piano and keys, and we had Johnny Charbonneau on drums, David Toler on drums, and Danny Toler, of course, and Dickey and myself. Well, I looked around, and Donnie Charbonneau wasn't there. There's Butch, and then I was playing a little bit more. I looked around, and David Toler wasn't there. There was JMO. I said, "Wow, this is trippy." And I looked over, and Greg Workman was gone, and I said, "Wow, that's Greg Allman." I said, "Wow, this is like the Allman Brothers Band, or what was left of it at the time." And we played that night, and everybody flipped out in the audience. And I'm like, "Wow, that was pretty cool," because it was kind of like the same music, but with the guys who really did it. It was very similar, but good. And so that's when I found out that, oh, there might be a reunion, that kind of thing. So they asked me to come down and audition for the gig, which I thought was weird, but it was okay, because why not? So I went down to Macon and auditioned for the gig. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get it, because there was one guy there who could play like crazy good. But I think what got me the gig was I understood what we talked about earlier, Dickey's direction. I knew when Dickey was doing, he wanted things, and he was a force, musical force on stage at that time. He'd had the band, he brought Danny in, and he knew Butch's playing so well. And so when he wanted a cue, I was with him, and that just made the music flow. When I saw them in '96, they had Alan Woody playing. I found out recently that was a rough time in the band's history. I think it was Alan that might have told me this. I don't know. I don't know the history as well. But I saw him in Pensacola, and I watched Alan play that show, and he was missing cues from Dickey, because I was watching Dickey and I knew Dickey's cues. And I said, "Why isn't he getting Dickey's cues? Dude, he's giving you like, now. It's like, what's up?" So I don't know what was up, but I think that's why I got the gig. I could read Dickey's body. By then I'd had a year and a half with Dickey, whatever it was. And it worked out. I think that's what got me the gig.
And I know at this time, I do know the history. Within a week, you played the Capricorn Picnic, kind of it's announced. But Lamar and Williams is still there, and Chuck. Did you ever play with them or cross? Because they chose not to join the band, which is why you and Danny. I don't know if it was going to be Danny too. I don't know, but had Lamar and Chuck come back, you would not have played bass then. So
I guess by default, yeah, that's what happened. But that was never in my mind or in my world, so to speak. Never thought about it.
Yeah, you're just there.
I wasn't
like
the personnel manager. I wasn't the personnel manager. I was the bass player, right?
Yeah. If from my vantage point, it's it's like interesting to go like, how in the world do these things happen? Like the reason you ended up in Dickey's band in the first place. So you have this great, like you have this reunion, you decide to go back to it, and then you go record in Light and Drugs. And there's a couple things I want to talk about that. One is it seemed like a pretty cool time for the band. There was a real